So we finally came to this thing called the Ruta de Liba. And the Ruta de Liba is the big benefit from the neshama, from the soul coming down into this world. And it's such a big benefit that it's willing to forsake or invest, if you want, its love and fear, natural love and fear of God in order to attain this Ruta de Liba, the will of the heart. That's what it's called. And it's called the inner point of the heart. So what do we mean when we say that? And where did this term come from? So it comes from the Idra Zuta, which we began discussing yesterday, which is what Rashbi taught, or Shimon Bar Yochai taught on the day that he passed away, and it appears in the Zohar at the very end, in Ha'azinu. It's called the Idra Zuta, the small congregation. Idra is like a congregation, because there were only 7 students there to hear this. A number of them had passed away already from the first Idra, from the first congregation, the first time they congregated. Okay, and here he explains the Keter. Now, a few words of order about the Keter are important. The crown, when we say that, so there was a whole discussion in the beginning of Kabbalah, whether when you say the crown, whether you mean Hashem. There was a Hava Amina. Hava Amina means there was such a thought that maybe when you say the crown, and by crown you mean everything that's above the person, and that's why we wear yarmulke and so on, because it's everything that's above. So maybe what I mean is Hashem himself. So in the Ramak's basic foundational work of Kabbalah, which is called Perodes Rimunim, he has a whole shal, a whole gate, many chapters dedicated to the question, Hayim HaKeter wa Ein Sof. Is the Keter the infinite? Is it the same thing? Eventually he comes to the conclusion, and everybody came to the conclusion that it's not the Ein Sof. It just means that Keter is what's beyond human perception. Not everything that's beyond human perception and understanding also, that a human being can't integrate it, refers to Hashem. It's not the infinite. So it's something that's beyond. And the most important thing is that we know a great deal, even though we can't perceive it, we know a great deal about the Keter. And where do we know it from? So we know it from Rashbi. Rashbi, before he passed away, he revealed how the Keter was built. But it was not clear until the Arizal came along exactly how to order it, how to understand what Rashbi was saying. These are very difficult passages. Out of all the passages of the Zohar, they're probably the most difficult. And like we said, this is all, it all comes from, originally from this book called Sifra de Tzniuta, the concealed book, or the hidden book, which is attributed to Yaakov, which means that Yaakov was the first one to, in his dreams, the dreams about the cattle, and how he was able to select them, and
Some sugar.
it's fine. Okay. So in the Keter we said there are 2 main parts. The higher part we'll call it, and the lower part, and they're called Partzufim. Partzufim is a Hebrew pronunciation of the Greek word persona. Why exactly this was used, I don't know. Apparently because Hebrew lacks a wealth of different synonyms for things. So Chazal, the sages in their time, 2,000 years ago, they adopted a lot of Greek words and turned them into Hebrew words, because they simply they weren't into the habit of creating new words like we are today. Today there's a lot of work on creating new words in Hebrew. But back then they were they were more akin to borrow something and Hebraicize it rather than invent a word in Hebrew. And anyway, it sounds like it's Aramaic, but it's actually from Greek. So he says, Kol tigunin da'atika kadisha. The higher part of the Keter is called Atik, and the lower part of the Keter is called Avik, the higher persona and the lower persona. And they combine together in what is the human being's superconsciousness, which means that it's the source of all my thoughts. Whenever we say, for instance, that wisdom is like lightning strike. And so where's the lightning coming from? So the parable is very clear. In the world, lightning comes from the sky. In the human being, the lightning, the thought, the inspiration comes from the Keter. The Keter is like the sky above my head. Each person, No, Chokhmah is the lightning strike itself.
Uh-huh. Well, this is
For
the
there
source
to
of
be-
the lightning.
Okay. Where's the lightning created? Where's this energy stored? It's stored in the Keter, and then it comes crashing down. And like a lightning strike, it's very quick. It illuminates everything for a moment, but then it's gone. So there has to be, for instance, something to capture the lightning. That's Bina.
Bina.
Understanding is it's called in chushat koach hatfisa, the power to capture things, and sometimes it's described in Chassidus as like people as a force that's able to capture a flying arrow, like somebody shooting an arrow and you grab it.
Robin Hood.
So that's
Look at
that's the level that you have to have in order to understand the inspiration. The inspiration itself is being formed in the Keter, and it's coming crashing out. Sometimes the description is not as lightning. Sometimes the description is that the Keter is bringing out drop by drop. It's like a wellspring. At the beginning of a wellspring, the water comes out drop by drop. That's like there. The idea is that you have to collect it, meaning it's coming over a long period of time, and you have to collect it and make sure that you don't lose anything. So the different types of inspiration, and all of this is discussed over dozens of books in Chassidus, like how, because this was seen as one of the most important things in a person's life, is how do I connect with my superconsciousness? How do I make it present in my day-to-day life?
Learn Chassidus.
Chassidus is a lot of instruction about how to make it, how to capture it, how to grab it, exactly how does it show up, how do you refine yourself so that you're able to harvest it if you want. The basic idea was that the Keter is in touch with Hashem completely, that it has 100% consciousness of God, and therefore I have an interest in trying to connect with Him, and so much so that even one of the shortest, call it like mottos maybe of the whole Baal Shem Tov's system was that he wanted the Keter to appear in a person's life. That's like a summary of everything that he tried to do. That a person's Keter, his crown, his superconsciousness, would become a viable force in his life, even though, again, there's no direct contact with it. It's all indirect.
So is it an interface for the human or not?
It's an interface between the conscious life and God. My conscious life is unfortunately very self-centered. My conscious life, unless I'm really a super duper heavy duty tzaddik, is entirely around myself. And my ability to come to any connection with Hashem, with God, is very limited. It's sporadic, and from time to time I'll have something. It's true, I think about it a lot maybe, and I want it a lot and so on, but the bottom line is my consciousness is really stuck with my ego. With my
Consciousness is really stuck with the
so
animal
consciousness has a real
soul.
problem. It identifies with the animal soul. So for the consciousness to even have any inkling of something beyond, it has to be in touch with the crown also. The crown is ultimately always conscious of Hashem. In the simpler way, you would say crown is Yechida. It's the singular one, the highest part of the soul, the part that doesn't even enclose within the body, and that's why it can be a good intermediate,
Right.
because it's not bound by the susceptibility of just thinking about myself all day long, which is how we are. It's just
So
how
how
we
is
are.
that
It's not-
different to the Neshama Shalakis?
Nefesh Elokit is like the Keter,
You like the Keter.
except the Nefesh Elokit is when something from the Keter is integrated, or to say it even more exactly, that Nefesh Elokit is the part that actually grows and changes in me depending on how much Torah I learn.
Depending how close to the Keter I get.
And it allows me to come close to the Keter. It allows me to come close to my superconsciousness. In later psychology, there's this understanding that the difference between the Keter and you is that the Keter can never be your identity. You can never identify with your super consciousness.
Of course.
Because it's super, it's above. So at most it affects you all the time, but you can't say, that's who I am. A divine soul, the Nefesh Elokit, is something that you can identify with. And it's part of you, it's integrated into your consciousness. Except it's a different possibility for who I am. It's saying instead of I am my ego and my lower needs and my self-centeredness and so on, I can become identified with my divine soul, which is a completely different story. And then that's what the tzaddik of the Tanya really is like. He's a person who has identified with his divine soul, who now feels that his role in life is to do only what Hashem tells him, only what Hashem has for him as his mission in life. He's not worried at all about his needs and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's a short introduction about Keter and how important it is. And in the end, we said you can't identify with it. You can't identify with it, but how can you even perceive it if you can't identify with it? She said, Chochmah comes down crashing like a bolt of lightning, and Bina tries to grab it, and there's this whole story. But in the end, it's all well and good, but you want it to have a lasting effect. And where is this lasting effect going to happen? So this is apart from the Idris, which we don't have very much time to read. We'll just start a little bit and then skip to the last passage, which is what we need. Kol tikunin da'atika kadisha. All the enclothements. Tikunin means the one thing is enclosed within another. So all the enclothements in Atika Kadisha, which is the highest part of the Atik, the higher part of the Keter, meaning it's the first four sfirot of Atik. B'mocha shakit v'satim mitakna. They can only be enclosed when the brain itself, here the brain is not the physical brain, it's in the, it's like it's a parable. So when we can say when the thought is quieted and concealed, then they can come one into another. They can be enclosed, and to be enclosed means that you can be revealed. If you have no clothing, you can't be revealed. So the keter can't affect a person if there's no enclothement within the keter. V'kol tikunin dezer anpin b'chokhmat hatam mitakna. Apart from the keter, there's something that we call the Zeir Anpin, which is the lower persona in the person, and this is all from the side of the divine soul, and it is what we would call what a person received, like the sum total of what the person received from his connection with the superconsciousness. Zeir Anpin is really a work in development throughout a person's life. We call it the small countenance. What we mean by that is that it's a reflection of what our keter, what our superconsciousness knows. So the superconsciousness has a part of it that's called arichanpin, the long countenance. And Zeir Anpin is like who I identify with as. That's where my identity lies. Okay, all these things need a lot of discussion from a lot of different directions to grab it, but in short, the Zeir Anpin is like the person himself.
This is the 6 midos,
right?
Without malchus.
It starts from the emotions, which is why it's so broken in the beginning, because emotions are broken as we start life. They're all shattered.
Could you say that it's like the difference between koach and pole, between the two?
It's almost like they used to have, I think it was called camera obscura. I'm not sure what the term was. I think that's what it was, but it's now being proved that a lot of painters in the Middle Ages used this. They used to put a lens in front of a scene, and then it would reflect that scene onto their canvas, and they would paint with that. It was a system. People still use it today. A lot of people do this. I don't know if it's known, but a lot of painters don't want you to see it. But they do that. They'll reflect the scene on the canvas in some way, and I think it was a camera obscura because it was a concealed lens. I mean, that's what it means. The painting that you're painting, that's your Zeir Anpin. The image, the original image that you're trying to mimic in some way, that's the keter.
Keter.
The camera,
Yeah.
which really the lens, is chokhmah. And that's what he means here. B'chokhmata mitaknan. You need a lens in between. It was so clean.
Mm-hmm.
It's called
Transparent.
aspaklaria meira. And it literally means a lens. Aspaklaria literally means a lens.
Lens?
And it's just in Greek and in Latin, I think. Camera, I think, is in Latin, and aspaklaria is in Greek, but don't hold me to it. I haven't checked these things in years and I don't remember. By Moshe Rabbeinu, this lens was perfectly transparent. By other people, by other prophets, this lens was what we call translucent, meaning that it was not clear entirely.
Hmm.
And so there was some
Obscurity.
and changed. Okay, so that's what he says here. That's exactly what he says. Kol tikunin de ze'er anpin. When you want to talk about enclosement in ze'er anpin, on this canvas, if you will, b'chokhmat atam mitaknan. They need the chokhmah. They need wisdom, and wisdom is what in the psyche. It's ability to self-nullify. It's the ability to nullify the self. The more I can nullify myself, the cleaner this lens is. And the more I can pick up what my keter knows, what my superconsciousness knows.
So
So by
chokhmah,
Moshe Rabbeinu was perfect chokhmah. That's what he says. V'nachnu ma. The we are what? Chokhmah is understood as koach ma, the power of nullification. Yeah.
so chokhmah and malchus are directly related?
Why Malchus? We didn't mention Malchus here. Though.
And malchus is the epitome of self-nullification.
No?
Malchus is mamish the yesh.
The opposite. Yeah.
It's a feeling of being. It's like kingship. It's being a king. To be a king, you have to have a lot of presence of the self. And the whole trick of a king, though, is for a real king, a
To know
rectified
that
king,
he's
is
still a
that on
vessel.
the outside, towards his people, he has to look like he's exalted, like he's above them. And the inside, he has to feel lowly. The lowly is not, it's the opposite of nullification. To feel lowly means to have a lot of feeling of self, but to understand what the self is worth. It's worth very little. In fact, the only thing that I can attribute really to myself is my mistakes. Those are the only things that are really mine. Everything else is Hashem's. And that's David's famous statement. Davidu omer, ki miyadcha akol, miyadcha natanu lach. David says, it says in Pirkei Avos, that everything that we give you from you.
Yeah,
It came from you.
Left pocket into right
And
pocket.
from your hand we give back to you. So what are we left with? All the stuff that didn't work out. Good. Okay. That requires a lot of discussion.
So
Okay.
lowliness and self-nullification are the same thing.
They're the opposite in a certain sense, because self-nullification is that there is no self. And lowliness is the true appreciation of what the self is worth. That really what it's
Nothing.
worth is not nothing, but rather it's negative. It's all the mistakes. The simplest way to explain this is, where do you want the negative to be? Do you want the negative to be in God, or do you want the negative to be in yourself? If you
Second
think
you
about
put it
a
in
little,
God,
if you put it in God, you make it eternal.
correct.
The world becomes negative.
And you
Everything
become-
is shot. On the contrary, you're the bunker where you want all the negative
Right.
to be. Let it explode inside of you. Fine, the world's a good place. You have a lot of chances to correct and to change, because Hashem is good, the world is good, everything, you're not a victim.
Right.
All these things, all these necessary things for a good psyche to develop. But the ego teaches you exactly the opposite.
Everybody else is
Throw
fault.
all the negative out,
Everybody else
and you're
is
only
fault.
good. And with that, everything that's sick now in the world, from beginning to end, comes from that simple mistake, which is that everything that's good is me, everything that's bad is outside. And the number one thing the Hasidus teaches is to reorganize that thinking, and to convince you that you're making the worst mistake that you can make. Even for you, not just because it's not true, but even for your own health, that's the worst type of thinking to have. And everything that's getting shot, everything that's being destroyed now, the whole, everything. It sounds simplistic, but you can show one
No,
after
no,
the
it's-
other
it's
that all
very
these things
strong.
come from the same place, from the same source. Okay, so now let's read the part that we want.
It's the yesh, it's the yesh.
How then in the world, so all you get is a reflection of the Keter. How can you get the Keter itself? And where in the end is this reflection written? So we said it's Zer Anpin. It's in the small comments, which we said probably begins at least with the emotions. Okay? But it's not that simple. Because the emotions have an external part and an internal part. The external part of the emotions is what we call the natural emotions. It's what you grow up with, it's what you feel, and so on and so forth, and you have to leave in 30 seconds. And
A minute and things.
and the internal part of the emotions, that's where you're basically drawing. That's where you're really recreating yourself as you go along. So here it says in the last passage, and this is a passage that everybody quoted, V'itema man atika kadisha. And if you say, who is the tika kadisha? Who is this? In the end, you want to know him. To know means to integrate, to grasp. Come and look higher and higher. There is what cannot be known. Normally, you're right, he cannot be known. He's called the Reisha de lo yada velo yitida, the unknowable head. What cannot be conscious, and he can't be conscious, what leaves no mark, he's like the description in many places is, it's like a cloud traveling in the sky, and the reflection, usually this is how it is. It makes a projection on the ground, which is its shadow. But the shadow, as it crosses the earth, leaves no mark. There's nothing there. So even if you have this camera obscura in the middle, and your keter is projecting onto your heart, and it's doing everything right, in the end it leaves no mark. Nothing's left there. So how do you come to know him? Who is he? Which really translates into, how do I come to know my higher self? What I can really be. And yet it contains all, and it includes two heads, and thus everything is rectified. When these two heads come together, this is the whole topic, and this is the biggest topic in Kabbalah, is how these two heads come together, these two parts of the Keter, how they come together. And it is not counted, not in principles, not in thoughts. I mean, you can't explain it neither by principles or by particulars. It doesn't matter how you try to explain it. In the end, it's ungraspable. Rather, there's only one place where it's grasped, in the will of the heart. This is This is probably the most important statement that he makes in the entire Idra, which is that know that there's such a thing called the will of the heart. Now, to understand what this will of the heart is, that becomes the biggest, one of the deepest topics in Chassidus. What does Rashbi mean when he says that in the will of the heart it can be grasped? And of this it is said, and this is an interesting thing, so he brings a verse you would never think of connecting. I said I will guard my path so that it not sin with my tongue.
Yeah.
So that I do not sin with my tongue. Meaning it has something to do, to uncover the will of the heart, it has something to do with rectified speech. That's the thing they're saying. Because speech, in the Tanakh, in general, it comes from the heart. But the heart is what talks. Certainly, deep inner words come from the heart. Like we say,
Whatever comes from the heart,
whatever
pieces
comes
the
from
heart.
it enters into the other person's heart, and it makes an effect. So there's something about the heart that's connected to speech. So this is a topic that's worth devoting a few minutes to, like we did now, 20 minutes to by itself. Okay, run.
Sorry.
So you
I'll
can come
continue.
tomorrow.
I can continue listening, but you need to give yourself a hotspot.
Okay. Oh, so hold on. Just a second. Let's see if I can do this in a second.
See how good you are on the fly.
Yeah, not too good. I'm older now. I used to be able to hack into NASA in about 3 minutes. Now I can't do anything. And that really requires...
You're on?
No, I don't think so. Hold on. I think we're back. Okay, so let's continue now here inside Torah Or. So we're on page Kav Zayin. So he said that even though Hashem is revealed only through the Keter, so with Reuta de Liba, which is the main thing that a person can grasp the Keter with, So then it becomes worthwhile to come into this world because you gain something that was not gainable before, which means that you go beyond your nature. The whole point of this world, again, before the neshama came down into the world, I had natural love and fear of Hashem. I had a natural connection. The whole point of this world is to distance myself from that nature in order to come to a second nature, to a higher nature that I might have. And this higher nature is revealed through the crown. Okay, so where are we? Okay. וכמו שכתוב, so we're here. About 7 lines from that. כמו שכתוב, ממעמקים קראתיך השם. From the depths I call you Hashem. מפני כי בחינת רעותא דליבה. How do you come to this will of the heart, this deep will, this deep understanding of the heart? It comes out of נמשך מהתבוננות זו עצמה. It comes out of the meditation on this fact itself. What does it mean? That Hashem is inconceivable, He's imperceptible. You cannot fathom Him. And just to know that the very fact that I'm able to have any kind of connection, that itself is the meditation that brings about the revelation of this will of the heart. And what does this mean practically? Practically means that in this sense, Yiddishkeit is so contrary to everything out there, because what we're saying is that the seeking of the personal connection with Hashem is the meditation that awakens the will of the heart. Meaning that if somebody, they call him an impersonal God, and if Hashem doesn't care about anything that's going on here, and I believe He created the world, I believe that He set up the laws of nature, I believe that maybe it was here till 2,000 years ago,
but now it's my
3,000
turn.
years ago. But now He's left, now He doesn't care anymore, it doesn't interest Him as much, it didn't work out, I don't know, whatever picture people have. That is the most detrimental, that's what makes it impossible to really have any kind of revelation of what we call the crown. The crown is revealed through the personal connection. Now, this is not just an issue with other so-called religions. This is an issue with somebody who doesn't know the light of Chassidus. The light of Chassidus was that you have to take the personal connection all the way to the level of, and this is what troubles people about all the stories, like Zusha sitting in this, sleeping in the sukkah, and saying, "Almighty, Zusha's cold." To say those words, people think that's silly. Huh? What are you talking about? Created the universe, and created all this, and He cares that Zusha's cold in the sukkah. That's exactly what He cares about. You're saying that meditation, to understand that in spite of the fact that Hashem is inconceivable, imperceptible, He's so beyond anything, He wants the personal relationship, because the personal relationship it's how you uncover the crown. It's how the crown comes into the heart. It can't come in any other way. That's the moment of transformation, if you want, before a person was a chassid and afterwards. Before he knew what the Baal Shem Tov was saying until afterwards. The moment that you don't make religion into something cold, that there's just rules I have to subscribe to, and I have to follow, and there's beliefs I have to subscribe to, and so on and so forth. And you come in and say, Hashem, libabai, libabai. What do you mean libabai? He says exactly that personal connection between you and me. That's the thing. That's the thing that Hashem is waiting for. And the moment that the person understands it, nothing is the same again. Because now he understands. So it's very good to daven, but I'm davening to somebody that wants me. It's not because I'm just following some rules. It's not just because it's not impersonal. And it's the most personal thing that I have. That's why we call it the will of the heart. It's like that to get there, you have to uncover your most intimate will for relationship. Really, that's what it means. That you're overriding what everybody wants in the end is not to be alone. So there was a statement that the Alter Rebbe used to say that from the moment that the Baal Shem Tov appeared, there's no longer nobody has to be alone anymore in the world. And he says that the Rebbe isn't alone because he has Hasidim. The Hasidim are not alone because they have the Rebbe. But Hashem is not alone anymore because he has everybody. Because now he can teach everybody that they have a real intimate relationship with Hashem. And he wants you the way you are. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov loved simple Yid, and he loved simple Jews, because he said they don't have too much in their mind. It's not like they learn too much. And they have a simple, almost naive faith that they can talk to Hashem. And Hashem is listening to them. He says, but that's exactly what I want. Even if you learned a lot and you come to that, it's even better. But so he has many, many parables, the Baal Shem Tov, about this whole thing, about Hashem being imperceptible, and then the wise man saying, since he cannot be known anyway, you might as well give up from the beginning. And the simple person, he doesn't understand exactly what that means. So he says, okay, maybe I'll get a chance to see him for a minute. And so he goes anyway, and he tries to get in anyway. So there's all kinds of various parables. I just put two of them together because that's how it came to mind. But all kinds of parables to explain this thing that Reuta de Liba, there's another word that's hiding here in Reuta. Reuta also means, like in Hebrew, if you take the word Reuta, the closest word to it is Reut. And that's actually how, like literally Reuta in Aramaic means will. But when you say Reut means companionship or camaraderie. There's a few words that you can use. And it's used to describe the husband and the wife. Right? So in that sense, it's the companionship of the heart. And it's like that I am connected to Hashem. And all this comes from these various things that Hashem did. For instance, He chose us out of all the people. And if you're smart, you say, so why would He choose? How am I different than anybody else on this earth? He chose me in order to reveal to me that He wants the relationship. To say it another way, a person who doesn't feel that he's chosen has no chance of ever developing this relationship. The fact, we'll say it in a different way, that the fact that the Jew says we're the chosen people is not for us to say we're better than somebody else. It's for us to be able to foster a direct, intimate relationship with Hashem. The very fact that you say this changes the whole scenario. It allows for the intimate relationship to develop in the same way that a woman who's married to somebody, she feels chosen, or the man who's married to his wife, he feels chosen by her. And because you chose me, so I can open myself up, I can connect at a whole different level. Of course, it means now that the whole relationship is founded on other principles. But sometimes I can do things that are wrong to my wife. Settle, but she doesn't stop choosing me because of that. And those are not hindrances to continuing to develop the relationship. In fact, people tell me, I don't know if this is true. They say that after you fight, when you make up, you're actually closer. So that's exactly the process of tshuva and the relation between the man and Hashem. That if you did something wrong, even the worst thing in the world, and you come and you say you're sorry, and you come and you do tshuva, so everything changes. The whole relationship comes to a whole new level. That's what we mean. The Baalei tshuva stand in a place where even perfect tzaddikim can't reach, because they're on a much higher level. Of course, because it's Hashem, so it doesn't matter how many times you have to ask forgiveness. We talked about that. He's really the infinite. So phrasing the relationship between man and Hashem through this concept of Reuta Deliba, it changes the entire outlook on what it means to be a God-fearing person, what it means to walk with God, what it means to have a relationship with Hashem. It changes the whole context of religion. It becomes something entirely different than what it was before. Unfortunately, this has been abominated by so-called religions, and they took the beginnings of this idea and they turned it into idolatry. And that's why it's so important for us that you can't phrase the crown in physical terms in the end. You have to understand that it's super consciousness, it's beyond, it's always imperceptible, it's always not known. So he continues. מהתבוננות זו עצמה, אם ישים אליו ליבו דלית מחשב התפיסה בכלל, והוא רם וניסה למעלה מעלה עד אין כסף תכלית, אפילו מבחינת חוכמה אליו, אי לזאת, so if he understands how impossible it is to reach Hashem, אי לזאת, and he follows it through, תחשוף ותכלה נפשו להיבטל במציאות אליו יתברך, לצאת ממאסר הגוף. And then he'll understand the value of being able to be outside the body, not limited by the body, in order to perceive Hashem. So what do I have that does this? The Keter.
Mm-hmm.
The Keter is like the part of me, which is not really me, I can't identify it with on the one hand. On the other hand, it's an intermediary that's always around the body, it's outside the body. And by that we don't mean a physical location, we mean that it's not limited by the limitations of the body. It is personal, each person has his own crown, he has his own Keter. And by using that as an intermediate, that being my image, as it were, or what's always connected to Hashem, then a person can come to some connection. That's what he needs to yearn for. So yearning for the personal, intimate relationship, that is exactly what awakens the crown to appear in the heart. That's called Re'uta Denima. And so he yearns, תכסף ותכלה נפשו לבטל במציאות עליו ידברך, לצאת ממאסר הגוף. Nartika, it wants to come out of the body. Lishtapech el chek avia, it wants to flow or to express itself fully before its father, the neshama, the crown. Masha'en kan neshama ter miridata litlabesh b'guf, but before the neshama came down into the body, it didn't know about this distance. It didn't know that there was a possibility even that it could be far and distant from Hashem, from the Creator. And so therefore, its love, its connection with the Hashem was always natural. And natural love means that it doesn't move. For instance, natural love in Chassidus is always described as a love between siblings. Mm-hmm. Love between siblings is the love that really goes throughout a person's life. It's an attachment, really in this case. Love is a caring or attachment. And it's natural in the sense that it doesn't matter if you haven't seen each other for 20 years, and you see each other again, it's at the same level always. I mean, you can make it more or less, but it never detaches. Mm-hmm. You never feel that there's no connection. I mean, some people, I know, they argue so terribly that they can't talk. They're always, I think, with a feeling of angst that something's wrong with this. Whereas, when it comes to not natural love, what's unnatural love? It's called mindful love. It's love that comes out of the mind. That's the love between between spouses, because that can completely disappear if you don't put your mind to it. Because it's not natural. You can't say that's the whole problem with marriage, is that people are taught that it's like Hollywood love, which is love at first sight, which is a type of instantaneous natural love, but that usually doesn't last. And if marriage is going to work, there has to be mindful love. I mean, there has to be an awakening of love from the understanding, from the intellect. That's called mindful love, and it has a lot of ups and downs. And it comes because there's really a detachment between the two. They're not from the same womb, husband and wife. So they have to develop their love. That's exactly the thing that we mentioned before, that the love between Hashem and the person, even though before the neshama came into the world was natural love, then it's called like, you're my brother. The neshama says, you're my brother. The psukim like this in Shir Shirim. When it comes into the world, it's a very interesting thing. If you go through Shir Shirim, one of the interesting things that happens there, and you have to check it, is that there's a yearning to move from being sister and brother to being husband and wife. It's like the whole movement in Shir Shirim is that it's a little concealed in the beginning, but the male and the female there are originally brother and sister, and they're yearning to move into being husband and wife. And the reason is because even though there is disconnect in order to get to husband and wife, the disconnect leads to a stronger type of bond, ultimately, than the natural. The natural doesn't change. That's the whole point. It's pretty constant.
You don't have to do much. It's like
you don't have to do anything, and it stays.
Yeah.
It's permanent throughout life. It doesn't go up and doesn't really go down. Husband and wife have a lot of ups and downs, but the overall effect is much greater. Of course, when it comes to relationships, so brother and sister, as much as they might love each other, they can't have children together. But a husband and wife can lead to children.
Mm-hmm.
So procreation, and that's the power of the infinite.
Mm-hmm.
We call the procreative power, the power of the infinite. So the infinite can reveal itself in a husband and wife relationship. In the relationship between the neshama and the body, as opposed with Hashem, as opposed to neshama outside the body with Hashem. So outside the body with Hashem, it's like a brother and sister, and it doesn't lead to anything. But in this world, becomes the power of the infinite, the procreation. You can actually change something. You can actually create something new in the world. Okay, so that's his last statement. Which is not how the soul is before it comes down into the body. It was permanent. It was exactly how the soul was created. That's how it was to perceive the Shem. But when you come down into the world and there's this distance created by the body, so from everything is open. A person can go to the greatest heights of connection to Hashem. And you can also, unfortunately, sink lower. But and completely sever the connection. But there's the possibility of movement. There's the possibility of change. And exactly the statement that everything is revealed through the Ruta Deriva, through the companionship, now we're going to call it instead of will. Again, it's not the literal meaning, but you can use it, the companionship, the connection that comes through the heart. So when a person, like to put all of when Hillel was asked, how do you condense the entire Torah to one statement? So he says, whatever you hate, don't do to your friend. So what is he talking about? How can you say the Torah isn't the intellect?
Yeah.
He's doing the same thing. He's saying it's all in the heart. Meaning, if you want to have a good relationship with Hashem, if you don't like it, don't do it to him. And Chavirach, there's a pasuk, Re'acha v're'a avicha, that Hashem is considered your friend and the friend of your father. And that's how it's called a lot of times. Chavra. Chavra, Rahmana usually is how it's called. Sometimes it's called Chavra, a friend. We call him an imaginary friend. But this imaginary friend, it's imaginary because there is a distance now. So I have to bridge that distance, and you bridge it with the heart. And how do you bridge it with the heart? That you have to have an overriding understanding that you're building a relationship in the same way that you would want to build a relationship with a person. So, for instance, one of the main things, this is a thing that I struggle with a lot, which is that friends or friendship, good friendship is built when a person is committed to their friends. They don't suddenly disappear when they're needed, and so on and so forth. The same thing is with Hashem, with the relationship with Hashem. You can't just say, so today I feel like davening to tomorrow, because then the friendship is about you, it's not about the other person. When you begin to understand what you hate, don't do to your friend, or the way the Torah says, I love you, fellow, same chavir, same also talking about Hashem, Ani Hashem. You learn from that the relationship between you and Hashem has to follow suit. It has to be the same way. So like we said, you learn all these things in practice by building relationships with people. But ultimately, you have to learn from the relationships that you build with people how you're supposed to act towards Hashem. Same thing.